In this video series, I'll show you how to create a fusion track using Superior Drummer 3, Easy Bass, and Easy Keys. Then we'll master that track using Easy Mix 2. In this first video, we'll start by creating the drum track. I have Superior Drummer 3 loaded in its default state, and we're using Studio One 5 as the DAW. If I open Superior Drummer 3, I'm going to go into the preset menu, go to Clean Kits, and we'll use AOT default. Next, we'll go into the Linear Fusion MIDI pack and we'll start putting together our drum track. I'll click on the Intro tab and we can audition any of these tracks by hitting play within the Grooves tab. Note that my DAW is set to 125 and we do not have preview in original tempo turned on, so when you audition any of these grooves and pull them into the song track, they will be synced with my host. And right now I just want to get the basics of the song structure, and we're going to start with an intro number 1, and we'll keep it as is for now. We'll manipulate it a bit later. For the next 8 bars, I'm going to do an intro section again, but I'm going to split up a couple variations here. I'm going to use intro 1 again, but I'm just going to use the first half, so we'll trim it in the song track, and then I'm going to use intro number 5, but I want to use the second half, so we'll trim the front end, and next we'll start getting into the verse. So I'm going to click on the verse section here, and we'll just do verse number 1. Again, you can audition if you need to. We're going to jump down to pre-chorus. We'll do pre-chorus 1. And then we're going to jump down to the chorus and do chorus 1. And this is our first section of the song. Now I'm going to expand the song track here so we have a little bit more real estate. And after the chorus, we're going to go into another verse. This time we'll choose pre-chorus, number 5. Now you don't have to keep these all in line. I'm using intro, verse, pre-chorus, and chorus 1 as the first section, and I'm using verse, pre-chorus, and chorus 5 in the next section. But you could mix and match however you want. So there was pre-chorus 5, and now we have chorus 5, and then to end this we're going to go to the bridge section and do bridge 5, and that is going to be our drum track. Now we're going to take a listen as it is. I haven't changed anything other than dragging and dropping the MIDI into the song track, and of course with this intro we split the portions, beginning of intro 1 and the second half of intro 5, just to show you we can kind of mix and match things there. But we're going to start getting into manipulating the MIDI in a variety of ways here in a moment. But let's listen to what we have so far. Now, rather than playing all the way through the track, let's take it in pieces. So for this first 8 bars, let's take a listen. Since I'm working in a DAW, I can press play within my song track, so within Superior Drummer 3. Or I can also, let me bring this window up a little bit. So here's Studio One in the background. And I can also, if I display this in a way where we have my host controls, I can start from the host, and follow host is turned on. So it will follow the host if I press play or stop and navigate from there. Now I already can tell I want to simplify this very first intro section, the very first 8 bars. We're going to start simple and we'll kind of build up in complexity. Now to do that, I'm going to double click, and that's going to take us into the edit play style. So here, what we want to do is adjust the amount knob and dial back the amount, which is going to make musical adjustments to the MIDI, but make it less complicated. Of course, we could turn up the amount and it would add notes, but I want it to take away notes from the original MIDI to simplify it. I also want to do the same for the hi-hat. I'm going to shift click on the hi-hat, so we have the hi-hat and the bass drum selected, and I'll just turn this down a few notches. Now this is going to be subjective. This is going to open up some space, and when we bring in the Easy Keys and Easy Bass track, overall it will just have a simpler feel to it. Let's take a listen. So that will work nicely just to start. For the next section, I'm fine with leaving it as is, so we're going to leave it in its more complex state. And remember, we have the first 4 bars of intro 1 and the last 4 bars of intro 5. And that leads us into our first verse. Now for the first verse, we'll go ahead and leave it as is. Let's take a listen to the tail end of the verse. However, there's a note in here we're going to actually adjust in the grid editor. Right here, the original MIDI has a break in the string of 16th notes, which is perfectly fine. But for me, I want to actually add a note in. I think I want to keep that continuous flow of 16th notes going. So I'm going to actually add a bass drum. I'll select the add or subtract tool, and I can just click in that note to add a bass drum note. And then I'm actually going to select the note right before it. Right now, both velocities are exactly the same, and we can take a listen to that. And that may be desirable, but a lot of times with a real drummer playing the bass drum, that first note, because of the technique they play, would be a bit softer. So I'm actually going to lower the velocity just so there's a little bit of variation there. Let's take a listen again. I'm going to go back to the edit play style, and I'm just toggling back and forth very quickly by selecting the proper tab, grid editor and edit play style. Next, for the pre-chorus, we'll make a few edit play style adjustments. Let's take a listen. Now, that's a really nice kick pattern, but it's a bit busy. So we're going to go the simpler route for this first run through. So I have the kick drum selected. I'm going to leave everything else the same, hi-hat, snare, but I'm going to simplify the bass drum. Notice too, in the MIDI block itself, as I adjust the amount knob, you'll see the MIDI be added or subtracted in real time. In this case, we're going to subtract. So I'll click a few times in the amount. You can see we have less bass drum notes. Let's take a listen. I'm going to err on the side of simplicity there. So I dialed back just the bass drum, simplified it in a musical way using edit play style. Let's move on to the chorus, and we'll take a listen to what we have. That's a really nice pattern. I like it as it is, but now I'm starting to get to the point I want to start ramping up some of the complexity. Nothing over the top, but we'll just kind of ease our way in. I'm going to select the hi-hat. We're still in edit play style, and I'm actually going to add some notes. Now, the way this was originally performed, the drummer had the right hand on the ride cymbal, left hand was filling in a bit on the left hand. This is going to add more left hand notes, which will just add a little bit more texture and make it sound a bit busier. That completes the first half of the track. Now we're getting back into our verse, starting at measure 41. So now we're going to get a bit more involved in what we do. So for this next verse, which is variation number 5, I like how that variation sounds, but I want to get a little bit more creative. If we take a listen one more time, we can hear how it is. But I want to add some variation. So here's what I'm going to do. I want to find this variation in the Grooves tab. So in order to find it, I'm going to right click on it, and we have this find option, find, select containing folder and grooves. That will take me to the exact MIDI variation. We could also find similar grooves or search with tap to find. We're not going to use those functions in this video. I'll select the containing folder. There it is, variation number 5. Now I'm going to actually click on the MIDI block, hit delete. I'm going to wipe it out completely. And here's why. Rather than add the entire MIDI block, I just want the kick and the snare from variation number 5. And we have this grooves parts section on the far right. It might be toggled off, so you can toggle it on. And if I drag and drop the entire clip, so the entire variation, I'm grabbing essentially all parts, kick, snare, hi-hat, and crash. But I don't want to do that. I just want the kick. So I'm going to drag just the kick over. And if we listen to that, we should just have the kick, and we do. And I'm going to grab the snare too, because in this linear pack, since everything is linear, a lot of times the kick and the snare will go very well together. You could certainly mix and match the kick from one variation, the snare from another, and hi-hat from yet another. In this case, I'm going to grab the kick and snare from the same variation. So this is the snare that I'm dragging on now. Now we'll take a listen. And so those open places are really where the hi-hat would fill in. And what I want to do for some creative variation here is actually grab the hi-hat from a different MIDI variation. I'm going to grab it from 4. And so I have 4 selected, verse 4, and I'm going to grab the hi-hat and drag and drop it on. Now, I dragged and dropped it on and I lined it exactly with the beginning of this block. So measure 41. We're not actually going to use it there, but I want to take a listen for reference to what that sounds like. Interesting. I'm going to actually hit undo, Command or Control Z. Okay, so now we're back to just the kick and the snare from variation 5. And I'm going to zoom in so that we can drag and drop this at the 8th note level. I have it zoomed way in. If we look at the grid marks and count, here's beat 3, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So these are 8th note grid marks. But what I'm going to do is have variation 4 selected. I'm going to grab the hi-hat again, but rather than drag and drop it and start it right at measure 41, I'm actually going to offset it by an 8th note. And you could offset it by any amount you want, but I'm going to offset it by an 8th note, and that's going to give it a very different syncopated feel. Let's take a listen. And I like that better than dragging it right on measure 41. Now we're not done. Let's go into the edit play style now, and I'll have the hi-hat selected. Let's add some additional notes. Now these additional notes that we'll add in the edit play style should fill up some of that space, but we'll still have that syncopated sound because we offset the MIDI starting on the 8th note, or basically an 8th note later than everything else. So I have the hi-hat selected in edit play style. Let's add a few more notes and let's take a listen. We're going to run with that. Lastly, we need a crash cymbal. So we didn't pull in a crash cymbal from the MIDI. So I could, of course, grab a crash here, drag it in, but I'm going to go back to edit play style. We can do that very easily just by adding an opening hit. We turn that on. Now I'm going to select the opening hit, and with that hit, notice the opening hit, the velocity is a little bit softer. I can increase that velocity so we get a nice strong cymbal hit. Now some of this space from that syncopated groove there, verse 2, will be filled up as we add the easy keys and easy bass tracks. So let me X out of the grid editor, and this is now pre-chorus, and this was pre-chorus variation 5. We'll take a listen as is. Let's open up edit play style and let's add some more amount. We'll add amount to the bass drum and the hi-hat, and we'll be fairly aggressive here. We'll add a few levels of the amount knob. Now let's take a listen. So that's a nice busy lead in into the chorus. Now, if we jump to the chorus, we'll stay in the edit play style. For this one, again, the drummer is playing right hand on the right cymbal, left hand on the hi-hat. A really nice pattern, but we're going to make an adjustment. Let's listen to the original MIDI. This is chorus variation 5. Now I like those open hi-hats, but I want a busier ride pattern. Now I could select the ride cymbal and I could add more notes with the amount knob, but we're going to do something different here. I'm going to take the power hand that is playing on the hi-hat and I will move that to the ride cymbal. That will essentially move all of those hi-hat notes that were being played there onto the ride cymbal, and that will make the ride cymbal pattern busier. And that's going to be a nice lead into our final MIDI block. We'll take a listen to the original state, and then we'll do some additional adjustments. Now this is a nice linear pattern between the bass drum and the snare drum only. We have an opening hit, we don't have anything else. Great pattern as is, but I want to add a bit more to it. So we're going to go to the bridge section. What I would like to do is go through all of these variations, and I will find any that have a ride pattern. And I want to add those ride patterns to this bridge MIDI block just to fill it out a bit more. I could listen to it and audition. I can also look at the groove parts and see there's no ride pattern. So I'm going to go right to variation number 2. And here we have a ride cymbal. Now I'm not even going to listen to it. I'm just going to grab the ride cymbal part in the groove parts section, drag and drop it onto my pattern. There's not a lot of ride hits here. It's not really busy. So I'm going to keep adding ride parts. I'm going to go to variation number 3. I'm going to drag and drop that on. Then we'll go to number 4 and add that in as well. So now we have some sparse but textured ride patterns within this bridge MIDI block. Now let's take a listen, and this is going to end our song. So that is going to be our general track. Note that we don't have any fills yet. Note that it really doesn't have a great ending. It just ends with the bridge track. We will fix that all in a later video, but this is what we're going to work with. We're going to start adding a bass and keyboard track with easy bass and easy keys in the next video. And then we'll start manipulating everything and making adjustments in the entire track, the entire song from there before we do a final mix using Easy Mix 2.